Hello, I'm Jack Grady, and on behalf of the Archives and History Committee of the First Baptist Church on the Square in LaGrange, Georgia, we welcome Vietnam veteran Walter Redmond, and we thank him for his service to our country and also his service to our church. Walter, welcome this morning. Thank you so much for your willingness to be a part of this project. I think, as you know, when we complete this, Paul Barnes, who's our technical expert, will be doing the actual recording. And he's going to make, I think, 4 copies of a DVD. And one of them will be kept in the Heritage Room here in the church, that's being monitored and maintained by our Archives and History Committee. Another one will be put in the church library so that people in the near future and in years to come, if they wish, can check it out and view it just like they check out a book. A member of our committee is Kay Minshew, who heads up the local museum on Main Street downtown. And she had asked us at the very beginning of this project to prepare a copy for the archives here in our museum in town. So that's 3, and the 4th one will go to you to keep and use with your own family. So anyway, we've been at this for a little while, interviewing World War II veterans, and we did about 20 of those. Regrettably, we didn't start sooner because we had lost about half of our World War II group. Then we did the Korean War group, and now we're into Vietnam era. But that Vietnam experience began for our country when about 42, 43 years ago, something like that.
Oh, my word. I don't have any concept really without getting my pencil and piece of paper out about how many years ago. But I understand we got involved in Vietnam probably in the late 50s. And then by the time Kennedy came along, we were
deeper involved.
Yes. And Southeast Asia was a real big question mark, I think, in everybody's mind about why were we there.
Yes.
And of course it was to stop the spread of communism, and that didn't work out too well for us.
Well, at that time, it seemed to be the thing to do, I guess, for our leaders. And you were willing to serve during that period of time, and did serve. And I would like for you to share a few things. Did you volunteer for service, or were you drafted?
Well, at the time that I did join the military, the draft was in force, and a lot of my friends were drafted. I made a determination on my own to join the Air Force. I understood it was a desirable branch of service to be in, and that way you could more or less determine or help determine your own future as far as your military service, rather than waiting to be drafted. So I did take the initiative. I went to see the recruiter, ended up in Atlanta at the reception center and was sworn in there, and did not come back home for several months.
Oh. They just kept you right there.
Oh, yeah, they sent you out from right there, but I did join the Air Force rather than wait for the draft.
And what year was that?
1962, April of 62.
1962.
Right. Wow. I graduated high school in June of 61 and went in the Air Force in April of 62.
You were a young man of about age
19
years of age, yeah. And where did they send you for basic training?
Well, from the reception center in Atlanta where you were sworn in, I flew to Dallas, Texas, which was my first airplane ride. Very exciting.
Yeah, sure.
And I flew out on what is a super constellation for those of, that remember the old bow-backed airplane with the three-tail.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, we went to Dallas and then got on a C-47, or actually it was a DC-3, commercial-wise. It was the one that was tail dragger, the one that sat down. You had to go uphill in the fuselage of the airplane to have a seat. We flew from Dallas to San Antonio, where I had my basic training at Lackland Air Force Base, San Antonio, Texas.
San Antonio. Okay, that was quite an experience too, I'm sure.
Well, it was. I thought, all the time I was there, the Alamo. That's where the Alamo is. And I never did get to see the Alamo because the 8 weeks or 12 weeks, whatever we had in basic, we didn't have any free time.
You were totally committed, I'm sure.
We were committed, that's right.
Well, they were doing their job, getting you ready, getting you trained.
Right.
And then tell us a little bit about your basic training experience.
Well, the basic training was doing some night patrols, going out at night and trying to, go to a destination that was predetermined, that you had a compass. It was crawling under the barbed wire with live fire overhead. It was explosions. The basic training, as I perceived it, was as much mental as it was physical. The sergeants that were over you in basic training, they tried to break you mentally. They would give you endless tasks of meaningless work to do, like digging a hole here and filling it back up and digging a hole here. This is disciplinary action I'm talking. And then they would come in for an inspection and just take your footlocker and turn it upside down, throw it down the hall.
Really?
Nothing, if there was just the slightest imperfection. Like if your socks weren't wound right, or if your bed wasn't made up right. The bed, when it was made up and your blanket was pulled down tight, he would drop something on the blanket and it should bounce. Yes, it should be tight enough for the object to bounce off of it. And of course, all of your uniforms had to be just right. The live fire was very interesting. We were trained in the use of the M1 carbine rifle and the .38 caliber revolver sidearm. That was the typical sidearm for the Air Force at the time. And all of this training, of course, it came in well because there were a few they weeded out. There were a few guys in my basic training squadron that were eliminated in basic.
I see. So they're putting everybody to the test.
To the test in order to try to eliminate the weak links, I guess, is what it was. Another interesting aspect of basic training was the KP duty. We had at Lackland Air Force Base, there was a combined mess hall that fed about 3,000 meals.
3,000 meals?
Yes. 3 times a day, everyone came to the same chow hall. And when you were on KP duty, it just would never end. I mean, you washed everything, maybe 3 times, and you caught KP frequently. If you were disorderly or if you did something out of the way, or if you were being punished, you might stay on KP for an extended period of time. But the thing about the mental and the physical endurance, that was what I recall from basic training. Of course, we had the gas mask test where you went in a room and they put tear gas.
They actually used it?
Oh, yes. You had to take your mask off in the room, and I hadn't thought much about my Social Security number up to that time, but you had to give your name, rank, and Social Security number in order to get out of the room.
Really?
And so, yes, I have never forgotten my Social Security number.
I guess that's one of those memorable experiences.
And I still remember my Air Force serial number.
Oh, you do?
After all these years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I can't say that I remember my Navy number, but I did for a long time, but I can't do it now.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Well, then where did they assign you after that?
After basic in San Antonio, I went to Biloxi, Mississippi, Keesler Air Force Base.
Keesler, yeah, okay.
And I took my technical training and continued my PE regimen. But the technical school was aircraft control and early warning and detection. Aircraft control and early warning. That was part of NORAD, North American Air Defense Command, and they monitored all the air traffic in the United States. The sites that I was stationed at generally had a radius of 500 miles. And so within that 500-mile radius, there would be another site that would pick up, and another site that would pick up, and so you could monitor someone.
The entire country was covered.
Yes,
in that manner.
It was.
Yeah, that is interesting.
And so the aircraft control and early warning system, which I had talked to the recruiter about, air traffic controller.
Yeah, you were interested in that area.
Right, and he said, well, this is similar. You will, get about the same training. And of course, the air traffic controller, you talk to the pilots. And the assignment that I got, the aircraft control and early warning, we monitored the flights and we watched them on the radar, and we could call our control center, but we did not communicate with the pilots. The control center communicated with the pilots. But I finished my training in Biloxi, and at that time a letter was passed around asking for volunteers to go to Vietnam, because when I joined that, I don't even remember Vietnam coming up, although we were active in Vietnam at the time, the country was. And they passed a sheet around wanting volunteers to go to Vietnam, and I did volunteer for service in Vietnam. And later I learned that my training was not the training that was needed in Vietnam. I was trained in fixed radar installations, and they used mobile radar in Vietnam.
And so that made a significant difference.
Yes.
In terms of your future involvement.
Yes, it did.
Or lack of involvement, actually, on the ground in Vietnam. That's interesting. Your background then was not exactly what you asked for, but similar, as you said, the guy told you.
Right.
But as it worked out, it was not what was needed in Vietnam at that time.
That's right, and then...
But you were serving somewhere else.
Right.
Where was that?
Well, as far as my duty stations, another letter came around in Biloxi and asked where you preferred your permanent station be, what region of the United States. And of course they had the Northeast, Southeast, Northwest, Central, and I put anywhere east of the Mississippi because I'm from the deep South. Nothing is the same as the South.
Yeah.
When you go out west, well, I eventually went out west, but the South is God's country.
Yeah,
and,
okay. So
I was brought up here and I loved it in the South, so I put anything east of the Mississippi.
Anything east of the Mississippi.
When I got my permanent station orders, they were for Tonopah, Nevada.
Nevada. That's not east of Mississippi.
No, my word. I had a time finding it on the map. And
what's the name again?
Tonopah.
Tonopah.
Tonapah.
Sounds like an Indian name.
I imagine it is. And it's halfway between Reno and Las Vegas. About 210 or 20 miles either way.
Okay.
And between
Nevada.
Reno and Las Vegas.
Yeah. Okay.
But anyway, had a problem finding it on the map. Determined to drive myself out to my permanent station. It took 5 days to drive out. There was no interstate highways, only 2-lane.
Yes.
And of course the little towns, about every 70 miles there was a little stop sign or a flashing light. And of course the police were there, and I spent the first night on the road in a motel at the Mississippi River, at the Mississippi line. I went US 80 straight out to Texas, and that was the only.
Was that Vicksburg?
No, it was.
Well, it doesn't matter.
I beg your pardon. It was Vicksburg, Mississippi. Okay. Yes, US 80, and it was a main highway for all the east-west traffic, and. For the rest of my trip, I ended up sleeping on the side of the road, just pull over, find a wide place, and took a nap in the car. When I woke up, I started driving again. I mean, it's not something that you would do now, but there's a lot less people back in the 60s than there is now on the road.
It took 5 days to get out.
It took me 5 days. The only interstate I encountered was between Dallas and Fort Worth, and that was ever how many miles that is, not far.
Not far, no.
And so I headed north from there and went to Amarillo, Texas, and got on Route 66, and took Route 66 from there to Flagstaff, Arizona. Through New Mexico, and headed north.
I see.
And 200 and some odd miles later, I wound up in Tonopah, in a very small town. There was about 105, 110 people stationed in Tonopah. It was the 684th Radar Squadron.
Oh, okay.
Located there.
That was your unit then?
That was my station, yes.
A radar squadron.
Right. And that was all that was there. We had probably 3 fixed ray domes, the big dome-shaped enclosures, because there was snow in that region and winds that might interfere.
That was the radar equipment.
Right. It was inside,
those domes.
inside the dome.
And how did that work?
Well, it sent out pulses of electrons, and these pulses were generated by what is called a magnetron tube. I don't know if you remember the old vacuum tubes.
Yes. Yep.
Well, this magnetron tube was about 3.5, 4 foot tall. It was fantastic. It was something out of a science fiction movie. It was said that if you stayed in the vicinity of that magnetron tube for only a few seconds, you would be rendered neutered.
Oh.
Yeah. No. So it put out so much power, so much force. But anyway, the signals would be sent out, and they would reflect off of an object if an object was in the way. If it wasn't in the way, the signal would continue on, and you wouldn't get a blip or a return signal.
And the purpose was to
detect,
monitor air traffic?
Yes. In Tonopah, we were located between test ranges in New Mexico and Nevada. And that was used for experimentation. They would fire missiles from White Sands, New Mexico, up into Nevada, and we would track that.
Oh, I see.
And we would track the trajectory, the direction of it, and speed. And, of course, general air traffic, we would monitor that, and military air traffic. Another very interesting aspect of Tonopah, Nevada, was the original manned, I would say, missiles or whatever, leading up to the space industry. B-52s would fly out of California, and they would have a little X-1, I believe it was, rocket attached to their belly, and 2 chase planes, which would be F-104s. And these 2 airplanes were flying beside the B-52. And you could step outside of your barracks or whatever when you heard them overhead. And the jet would fall from the belly of the B-52. It wasn't in the B-52, but attached to the bottom. And he would drop it. He would release it. And after he released it, that jet would ignite its engines. And, of course, it was a limited amount of fuel, so they could only go so far. But the chase planes, as soon as they dropped the rocket, it was a manned rocket is what it was, the chase planes would take off. They would just disappear in the distance, and then the rocket would ignite, and then the rocket would it would take off. It would go very, very fast, and it burned its fuel in no time, and it would land in Utah, at Salt Flats.
So you all could see that or monitor that?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Well,
commercial air traffic, military air traffic, and then test.
Okay.
Military tests.
So you had to monitor everything that moved, I guess, in the sky.
That's right. And the elevation, we could go up to 100,000 feet in elevation.
Is that right?
And then a 500-mile radius. Yeah.
Did you ever pick up anything that was unusual or different?
All the time.
All the time.
But we never knew, see, because headquarters, which was in Reno, they ran tests all the time to see if we were, on the job watching. So you didn't know if it was a test pattern that they were running or if it was a real live happening.
Yes.
But some, we have a 500-mile radius, which is quite a large distance, and the radar would wrap about every 12 seconds. It took 12 seconds for it to go around, so 5 times a minute. And every time it looped, it would cover 500 miles.
Yes.
And sometimes you would spot something on the right side of your screen, and the second round or 12 seconds later, it will have disappeared on the other side of your screen.
Yeah, so interesting. I was in the Navy, and of course we had radar and sonar aboard our ship, but I was never involved in any of that. I just knew that it was there and it did its job well. Well, were you stationed there for the rest of your time in the service, or were you sent somewhere else?
Well, no, I was sent to Arizona, another station not east of the Mississippi.
Yeah.
But, when I was in Nevada, I was in Nevada when the Cuban crisis occurred, and we were put on alert for that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you remember that instance where Kennedy, decided that he was not going to allow Russia to put missiles in Cuba.
Yes.
And so the showdown occurred, and we were put on high alert, and nothing really affected us, where we were. But we were certainly aware that things were happening.
On duty, were you pretty much around the clock?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely.
I'm sure you were.
While this went on. But anyway, I got my rotation orders, and it was for Mount Lemmon at Tucson, Arizona. Mount Lemmon was, our headquarters was Davis-Monthan Air Force Base at Tucson. And Tucson was about 30 miles as a crow flies from the top of Mount Lemmon. Tucson was 2,000 feet above elevation, and Mount Lemmon was 9,800 feet above elevation. So you could go swimming in Tucson and snow skiing on Mount Lemmon in the same day. That was the variation. But it got very cold up there. We got snowed in a couple of times where no traffic could go in or out. And we were served by helicopters. They brought in supplies.
Your duties were essentially the same?
Yes, well, it was the same type of duty, but our mission was a little bit different because Tucson was only maybe 50, 60 miles north of the Mexican border. And that was at Nogales, Mexico. And being up high on the mountain, we could look down also. We could go up 100,000 feet and down as far as 10,000 feet. Wow. So we could monitor large vehicles coming out of Mexico and also air traffic coming across the border. So we monitored civilian, military aircraft, and we also were looking to interdict illegal traffic.
Well, and I'm sure there was some of that.
Yeah, the drug business was going on back in the 60s, just not to the extent that it is now. But you could track a tractor-trailer truck coming out of Mexico into the U.S. with that same radar.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Because you're looking for that signal to come back, that reflection.
Yes. I understand you volunteered to go into Vietnam. Or tell me a little bit about that. Maybe I'm thinking of something else that you...
Well, when I was in Biloxi in technical school, like I said, they sent out 2 letters, and we were addressed as a group. Our training group was. One of them was, where would you desire to be stationed? And that didn't work out.
Yeah.
And the other one was, would you be willing to volunteer to serve in Vietnam?
Yes.
And I did volunteer to serve in Vietnam.
That's what I thought.
But my technical training was not something they needed in Vietnam at the time.
Yeah, okay. Appreciate you clarifying that for me. Well, how would you say that the experience you had in the military prepared you for the rest of your life?
The military service, I guess because of the nature of the fact that you recognize authority, that you have to hurry up and wait, and there's lots of that you have to do. I think discipline is what I took away that was most important for the rest of my life, was the discipline that I learned. You know, you have a deep respect for those that serve, number one. And as in every aspect of life, you got the slackers, you know, and then you've got the people that are willing to do the work.
And go over and above sometimes.
When we went to Lackland as a group and were in basic training, they put on a fire drill the first night we were there. The first whole night. We didn't get there at 4 o'clock in the morning the first day at Lackland. But that night they put on a fire drill, and it was like 2:30 in the morning. And of course the instructors knew what was going on, and they knew what they were doing. But the first guy out the door with the fire drill, he became our squad leader. And he didn't have to do KP, and he didn't have to do extra duty, et cetera, et cetera. So you learned, you know, to try to be in the right place at the right time. You also learned disciplined, the mere fact of pulling KP, you know, and serving all those people at one time. I'm talking about, you know, just 3,000 people for one meal, and they did that 3 times a day.
Mind-boggling to me.
And you learn to be a servant. You learn patience. You learned discipline. And I think what I learned in the military served me well. The pay was not very good in the military. As a matter of fact, I made $37 a month, best I remember, which was not a lot of money. $17.50 twice a month.
Oh yeah.
But I had food and I had a place to sleep.
And you had a doctor and
that's right.
Services.
That's right.
Your career after the service reflected some of that training too, didn't it, in preparation?
Well, I went to work for Georgia Power right out of the military, and I spent maybe a year with them and then moved to Florida to go to work at Cape Kennedy. But as it would happen, as soon as I got down to Florida with my brother who lived down there, Cape Kennedy went under their fiscal year ended, and they laid off a lot of people. And so I had my IBEW union card from Georgia Power, and I stood in line with the rest of the IBEW members who couldn't find work. So that went on for a while, and they were hiring back, but it took an extended period of time to get everybody back. I went to work for A&PT Company, which I had worked for them earlier in life. During high school, I worked at A&P, and I went into work in the meat department for A&P.
Really?
And I transferred from Cocoa, Florida to to Jonesboro, to College Park, and eventually ended up in Manchester, Georgia. And I put in an application for Southern Bell and was called and took their test and joined Southern Bell in 1968.
68.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you were with them for quite a period of time.
A&P, let's see. No, Southern Bell, 23 and a half years.
23 and a half years, yeah, I thought
Right.
so. I knew that you had a long career with them.
Yes.
And along the way there, you became a husband and a father, and I don't know how soon after you came home. Was it a period of time there getting resettled?
Oh, there was. I tried schooling. We had the school benefits from the military.
Yes.
And I went to
GI
Columbus
Bill,
College. Yes, I went to Columbus College and did 2 years there. And it wasn't exactly my cup of tea. And I eventually got married and had a family, and that family, my children are grown. I have a son that works at Diverse Power.
Oh.
He's a manager there. And I have a daughter that's an RN at West Georgia Medical.
Good.
And a son who is an electronic technician that works for one of our church members here. And then a housewife, a daughter that's a housewife. She's married to an Army fellow who is going to retire this coming year.
So you have 4 children.
He'll have his 20. Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, actually 5. Michael, my stepson, is currently in the military.
Oh, yes.
At Fort Benning.
Okay.
And he has 6 years active duty in, and he's been to Iraq twice.
Has he really?
Yes.
Well, later on, we're going to take a look at these folks who came along and made a career, or at least have served in the military.
Right.
Other than the wartime periods, we want to also look at those and talk with some of them. And I'd like for Michael to be one of them. Maybe we can do that. Well, thank you so much for your presence here. I know you're very active in our church. I didn't ask you any questions about that, but I know you're quite involved in what do you call it, Operation Recovery?
Well, Celebrate Recovery on Thursday nights. Yes.
Celebrate Recovery.
And we enjoy our work in the kitchen on Wednesday
excellent
nights.
Ministry, and I know the kitchen service that you and Terry do. We appreciate all that you do. Thank you.
Glad to do it.
Yeah. And I mentioned already that Paul Barnes is our technical expert here, and he's doing the recording, and you'll soon get a copy of this DVD.
All right.
Walter Redmond, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
I appreciate the invitation.
Good.
And highly recommend military service.